Jake Schrantz back with you on Huskers Hoops Live. And now it is time to talk to Drake Keeler from Hail Varsity. Drake, let's start with the Purdue game. So first, I just want to get your thoughts about, what you saw about the fight that this Nebraska team showed in that fourth quarter, because I don't think anyone who was paying attention to that game was going into that home stretch thinking, you know what? I really feel a 23-8 quarter is coming up right here to win the game for Nebraska.
Yeah, I mean, it had been another kind of rough game, considering the performances on offense they'd had lately, and they struggled on the road so far this season. So, I mean, they really needed that. It was a pretty big quarter, obviously, and a big win, considering it was on the road against a team, they should, expect to beat.
The way that they were able to come together and just say, put everything aside, let's get this win and bounce back from that Ohio State game, I thought was pretty impressive. But Alexis Markowski was really great in that fourth quarter especially, and it actually ended up being Maddie Kroll that hit the big three in the corner to kind of extend the lead enough for Nebraska to officially take over. But Jazz Shelley was really that absent piece for Nebraska in this game. So why do you think the Huskers haven't been able to get all three of their top scoring options on any given night, whether it's a Markowski, Shelley, and Bourne combination or a mix of some other three?
Yeah, I think that's been pretty interesting, I guess, because that's kind of been the story, recently and throughout the season. There's an inconsistency there. Of course, Jazz has been, quiet for the recent stretch, and she still impacts the game a lot through defense, and she's always running the offense, making a lot of great passes to set things up. But the scoring isn't always there, and that goes for the rest of the scoring options. So that's, I guess, kind of led to some of their offensive struggles. But like you said about Maddie Kroll and the Callan Hake, those two guards have kind of stepped it up at times. So the balanced attack they've kind of had can work, but sometimes it obviously hasn't.
And even in this Purdue game where Nebraska was able to put together a huge fourth quarter, the three-point shooting for Big Red was, it was questionable at best. In the last four games as well, Nebraska shot 31 of 129 from deep. That's just a 24% clip for the team from three-point range, which is now third worst in three-point percentage in the entire conference. So where do you think the shooting has gone? Because it isn't always that the defense is making things tough out there for Nebraska. If you watch the games, a lot of times the Huskers are just blowing opportunities.
Right, yeah. And that's what Amy Williams said against Rutgers, which is obviously the game where they missed the first 21, and that's what I saw, that they weren't necessarily getting, bad shots, not to take anything away from Rutgers' defense, but a lot of those shots were just open and missed, and that was a story again against Ohio State and even against Maryland and Purdue. But, I think it's hard to say where that's gone. And then against Purdue, something Amy Williams said is when the shot's not falling, because when you're taking, 25 threes a game, I assume there's going to be some games where they're falling at a better clip from here on out. But when they're not, that they want to still be able to win and, try different things. And that's what they did against Purdue, which is also really encouraging to see, because they hadn't really put together a performance like that this season.
And it's getting a little frustrating to think this way, because I'm in the same boat as you, thinking at some point this season that shot is going to start going down. Maybe it comes up this weekend against Iowa, and we're just ready for an offensive barrage on the road where Nebraska just drops in three after three. But the recent games have not given us enough evidence to really expect that out of anyone on this team. Callan Hake has probably been the hottest shooter from deep on the team in the last month or so, but it's getting to the point late enough in the season where it's getting hard to say, that shot is coming, because this team really just hasn't been consistent enough.
Yeah, they've been streaky, and earlier in the season it looked like they went on a good stretch and maybe they kind of solved that. But, at this point with the recent streakiness, you kind of just have to look at it as like, this is what the team is. So, I mean, they're going to have some games where they're going to get that three-point shot to fall because, I mean, obviously they have talented shooters. But it's going to be interesting to see when it's not falling, can they continue to play defense at a high level? Can they get inside and, really attack the rim and have success there, which also hasn't been, a guaranteed thing from game to game.
Jake Schrantz talking with Drake Keeler of Hail Varsity here on Huskers Hoops Live. And with Nebraska struggling so much from deep, is this still an acceptable offensive system for the Huskers to run when they're struggling so much? Because Nebraska, they have shot 506 three-point attempts this year so far, and they're the only team in the conference with over 500 attempts. They lead the Big Ten in three-point shooting attempts, but they're struggling so mightily from deep at this point where you have to wonder, do you have to change things up going forward?
Yeah, I mean, that's the hard thing, and I don't know if I would say, like, oh, you have to change things up a certain way because, I mean, it's also worth noting, there's with Allison Widener out, she was the team's, I guess, best threat driving to the rim and finishing at the rim. Sam Hybe's back, that helps. But losing that threat has kind of made them more dependent on the three-pointer recently. I think that's been part of the recent struggles. So they just got to, I mean, they can still shoot a lot of threes. I don't, that might not be the biggest problem, but they got to be able to work it inside when it isn't falling. And they haven't always been able to do that.
It's so amazing to see Nebraska be able to get this many three-point attempts up in any given game because I'm sure there's a lot better shooting teams in the conference with some elite scorers like Iowa or somebody like Indiana or Ohio State. They would love to get the open looks that Nebraska has gotten recently and generate that many looks in a single game. But how do you think that the Huskers can find success again? Because the three-point shooting has left them, but they've still been kind of up and down. They're getting these wins like we saw against Purdue, and it's maybe not paying off as much as we would see. Like when a team starts to shoot poorly, a lot of times that leads to big-time losing streaks. And we saw one a little bit after, I think around December, we saw a little bit of a losing streak. But over the past few weeks, Nebraska will get a win here, loss here, win here, loss here. It's been kind of back and forth.
Yeah. I think, the best thing you can say is, like, they've played defense really well. They're giving up, the second fewest points of any team in the conference. And, that has been, a really great thing. Kind of overshadowed by the offensive struggles, but that should, you would think that'd be enough to, I guess, kind of keep them afloat over the rest of the season. And then, yeah, I mean, it's going to depend on if they can, consistently get Alexis Markowski going, if, Sam Hybe can continue to work her way back and play near her highest level. And, I mean, they're going to need some threes to start falling because if you're shooting like that every game, even if you are having success inside, it's not going to be easy to win.
One other thing that Coach Williams, after this game against Maryland, talked about was the slow starts that they've been having. Just 2 for 13 in the first quarter against Maryland this past weekend, and even in the game where they scored 80 points in the end versus Penn State recently, they still went 8 for 22 from the field in that first quarter. So what do you think Nebraska needs to do to avoid these cold starts in the game?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I think, I looked at the Ohio State game when they went down 25-12 in the first quarter, and that was, I felt like a lot of bad shots early or quicker shots. I mean, it's been something different each time because against Maryland, it felt like they were turning it over, miscommunicating quite a bit. And that's when they scored 14 points in the first half. That was their lowest all season. And it's like, I don't really know what they need to do to figure that out. But, you can't put yourself in a hole like that, especially against, when you have 4 or 5 more ranked teams upcoming. that's going to hurt you a lot.
And you would have to imagine this weekend against Iowa, if Nebraska starts anywhere near as cold from the field as they did against Maryland or really any of these recent games, I mean, Caitlin Clark is not going to hesitate to use that to their advantage and really just put Nebraska in the grave from the get-go.
Yeah. I mean, you don't want to start slow against the top offense in the conference. Averaging 87 points. That's not going to work out. Against like you look at some of the top offenses in the conference. Ohio State, they started slow and couldn't catch up. But against Indiana, they hung with them the whole game, and that's something they're going to be able to need to do. But yeah, well, I guess we'll see on that.
What are your thoughts about all of the different lineups that Nebraska has had to throw out there this season? I mean, Nebraska sits at just a .80 turnover margin. That's 9th out of 14 teams in the conference, 8th in turnover ratio in the conference with 1.07. I would imagine that all these new faces in this rotation, as well as just the mix and match of starting lineups that we've seen this season due to injury, has contributed to turnovers quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm sure that has been a difficulty. It's good that they've kind of, not great that players are out, but good that they've been able to kind of settle down with the rotations and get the, same groups of players out there from game to game. So, you hope that continues to help throughout the rest of the season for sure. And they've just got to cut down on turnovers, whatever that the cause of that be sometimes.
And the turnovers were part of that early season storyline of why Nebraska wasn't able to get out to that big-time winning streak like we saw last season and kind of started out a little bit slower. But let's get into the big game coming up this weekend against I don't remember what number they are now with the new rankings, but coming up this Saturday against the Iowa Hawkeyes. This game will be broadcasted live on Fox at noon on Saturday. So how awesome is it that this women's game will be featured on such a huge network in such a hot commodity time slot for college basketball, especially now that the college football season's done. College basketball has really taken the forefront in broadcasting and sports on the weekends.
Yeah, it's great to see. They played on ESPN against Indiana on New Year's. So that was really cool. And now they've got another, Fox game. So both these Iowa matchups are going to be really fun to see. One being on national TV, the second, being in Lincoln, and that's going to be a great crowd there. So it's going to be a fun game. You hope that they can avoid that slow start and keep it, close throughout. There's going to be a lot of threes thrown out. I think they're two of the top teams in 3-point attempts in the conference, and we know Caitlin Clark will pull it from anywhere. So I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, the 3-point attempts definitely going to be a big-time factor in why people are excited. But for any fans who may somehow still be unfamiliar with Caitlin Clark's game from Iowa, explain to them what it's like to watch her perform on the court, because I'm sure you've gotten to see her play live as you've been covering this Nebraska team for a few years now, I believe.
Yeah, they just took down number 2, I believe it was, Ohio State yesterday, and Caitlin Clark made a few very deep threes. She had a triple-double, and I mean, she's a great scorer. She can do, everything offensively. You can only hope to slow her down somewhat or hope that her shot's off on any given game. But, it's going to be obviously very tough to overcome.
And going up against an offensive talent like Caitlin Clark, you have to almost go at it with the mindset of, we know we're not going to be able to stop her. At best, we're hoping to hold her to maybe 20 points. She's only had one game this season where she didn't score at least 20, and in that game she had 19. So no team has really been able to limit her. But you almost have to come out and think, let's just get those shots up. We're already the best team in the conference at getting those 3-point looks. So you might as well just go out and look for a shootout, I imagine.
Yeah, that might be the way. You also want to continue to see your defense do well. Obviously, Caitlin Clark's going to score, but other than that, you want to limit players like I believe it's Monica Sonano, and the rest of their team. Um, so that's going to be a hard challenge. I think they played fine against another team in Ohio State, held them to 76 points. Obviously, they kind of just slowed down late, but they put together some good defensive possessions. So you want to continue to do that. But yeah, you're going to need a big performance from your offense on the road.
I definitely don't want to see Jazz Shelley repeat what she did against Penn State with just those 4 shot attempts. Definitely want to see your best three-point shooter, or at least one of them, get a lot of looks up on the road against Iowa. But speaking of being on the road, how would your expectations kind of change if this game on Saturday was the home game in the series as opposed to Nebraska having to head on the road and face this Iowa team where they're strong in their home arena?
Yeah, it's going to be difficult. Of course, it's Iowa, and then Nebraska's kind of had some struggles on the road. Of course, they got the win over Purdue and the win over Maryland earlier this season, but it's generally been tougher for them away from home. So it's going to be interesting to see how they're able to deal with that.
Nebraska on the road this season just 2-5, but Drake, thank you so much again for hopping on Huskers Hoops Live. I really appreciate you spending the time in the morning with us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Have a good one.
You too.
That was Drake Keeler of Hail Varsity hopping on Huskers Hoops Live with me this morning. Always great to talk to him. He has a lot of insight on this Nebraska women's basketball team, and it's been awesome to bring you guys a lot of the coverage on this edition about this women's team. There's a lot going on this week with them as they get ready to take on Iowa on the road.